Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us for the 4 o'clock News and Politics show. 3 o'clock was Ava Gaudet with Entertainment. Be sure to check that out if you didn't have the opportunity to yet. I'd like to welcome my guest here, John Marion, into the studio. He's been here before, Common Cause Executive Director, and as we were just discussing, the first official kickoff event for the legislative agenda for Common Cause. I'm so used to seeing sort of these events happening. They're usually wrap-ups. Now we're doing a kickoff.
Yeah. So we've often done wrap-up events, sort of summarizing what happened in a legislative session. We thought we'd sort of celebrate the beginning of the session, although we're about a month into it already. But things are starting to pick up there on Smith Hill, so we thought we'd share with people what we're up to for the year.
And so tell us a little bit about tonight's nuts and bolts for the event if folks are interested.
Sure. So it's at 6 p.m. at the Wild Colonial on, I think it's 250 South Main Street. Most people know that place. And it's just come anytime between 6 and 8. We'll probably have a little speaking program about 6:30. But if you can't get there until 7, come on anyway, and we'll still talk to you, answer all your questions.
So you're going to be going over the agenda for 18, and I'll probably put you through your paces a little bit here. Kind of want to kick off with CLEAR, the citizen lobbyist access for what's
Aaron Regenberg.
Easier, yes.
Yeah. I'm not sure the acronym myself, but Aaron Regenberg, Representative Regenberg, who's also running for lieutenant governor, put in a bill already trying to get better access to the General Assembly for citizens. I think the one that made that sort of headlines was childcare for people going up who need something to do with their kid while they're watching the legislative process or testifying, and parking. But there are some other things in there about access that we think are also really important, and so we'll be supporting that. Yeah.
And one of the, you mentioned parking, folks who've gone up to the State House, that is an issue. But one of the ones in there too was the sort of citizen lobbyist, when there's a hearing, kind of keeping that first 10 testimonies for citizen lobbyists and not paid lobbyists. I mean, we saw this happen with the PawSox.
Yeah, so one of the frustrating things, and it happened to me last week, is going up there and not knowing when you're going to testify. And, I'm a professional. I get paid to be up there. I am one of those professional lobbyists. And I can wait. I've made plans. Brought my granola bar and hired my babysitter. But if you're a citizen, you may be only going up once a year. You should have a chance to go first before those of us who are getting paid to be up there, and I think that's a great idea.
So that's a set of a package of reforms under that CLEAR acronym, but let's talk a little bit what you're going to be talking about tonight.
Yeah, so we usually try to narrow it down. We work on a lot of things every year, but we try to narrow it down to 2 or 3 that we look at as priorities. The big one, the one we're really optimistic about, is early voting. So the Secretary of State has put in bills for the last 3 years to really kind of modernize how people vote. Now you can register online and things like that. Well, the next thing is letting people vote early. Right now, a lot of people are using mail ballots to do that, but mail ballots really aren't the best way to do that. People should be able to go into town hall and cast a ballot, put it in the machine, know it got counted.
How's the nuts and bolts of that work? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it would look just like a polling place on election day, right? You'd go in, they'd ask you for your ID. Once you check in, they'd hand you a ballot, you'd mark it, and then you put it into that machine, and when it makes that nice, cute little computer sound, you would know your vote was counted. Right now, people are using what they call emergency mail ballots. You fill out an application, they give you a ballot, you fill it out, put it in an envelope, and sign it. What a lot of people don't know is hundreds, if not thousands, of those get thrown out. There's a problem with the signature or the address you put on it. And it gets thrown out, and you don't even know it gets thrown out. And so we want people, when they vote, to know it gets counted.
And how soon could you do early voting?
So, I mean, it could happen. The bill's written to go into effect this year. Our primary is not till September. The legislature usually finishes up in June. This could be done this year.
And when we were talking early, affecting both primaries and the general?
Yeah, so that's the plan now. Now, these things are always subject to negotiation up at the Assembly, and some states have phased these things in over time, but we would like to see it, both the primary and the general.
And how earlier than the actual voting date could you go and actually take care of your voting? Yeah,
so under the legislation, it would be just like a mail ballot now, so okay. 20 days prior to the election. It would require some evenings and particularly some weekends, which a lot of people desire the ability to vote on the weekend because you're working during the week.
And I'm assuming that there might be a small price tag associated just with staffing.
You know, it's interesting. It's hard to get a handle on what it would cost. Certainly there would be some staffing costs, but for a lot of cities and towns that are seeing, a real explosion of mail ballots, there's a cost with that too.
True.
So some cities and towns are saying this might actually lower costs.
Very interesting. And how many other states have a system akin to this?
So the vast majority, so 37 states, the District of Columbia, have some version of early voting. Almost half of all votes in the 2016 presidential election nationwide were cast early.
Wow. Okay. So that's agenda item number one.
Agenda item number one. The second two are going to be a little tougher road to hoe for us. One is redistricting reform. We're coming up on a census in a couple of years. And every 10 years, I was just reading articles going back to the 80s, every 10 years they have to redraw the lines, and every 10 years there are big fights and political vendettas, and it may be good for the news, but it's bad for citizens. And so we want to take that out of the politicians' hands, because it really shouldn't be a politician deciding who their voters are. It should be voters deciding who their politicians are. So there's a model from California where they created an independent body. And we want to follow that California model. They may be the biggest state population-wise, we may be one of the smallest, but there's a lot we can learn from them.
And let's talk about where we are, as you going into this process 10 years since the last one. And you talk about the ability of the news to be there and be in the process and be that transparent and open. That could be a factor, but how would that citizen input look per California? I mean, how many meetings are we talking about? I mean, how much say and sway does the average citizen have in the end?
Yeah, so in Rhode Island they had a lot of meetings. I think there were 28 meetings last time, but it was all the real work was done behind the scenes, right? And the meetings were just a show trial for what was happening behind the scenes. In California, the meetings were the actual work of the commission, and the public input mattered. So the result was a lot of incumbents were put against each other, and the districts looked a lot different. And you couldn't look at a map in California and say, that's where the political score was settled. The way you can in Rhode Island, District 35 in the state Senate, we all know that was designed to punish Dawson Hodgson.
And as we look at it and we talk about the process, I mean, if the district ended at Dorrance and they were looking to move it up to another street over, I mean, how does the process even begin to say, let's reevaluate where these lines should be?
Yeah, so they look at a variety of factors, and one of the things we want to do is sort of change the factors they have to look at in the Constitution. Just the last couple of weeks, there was a huge case out of Pennsylvania where the federal courts, the state Supreme Court, threw out their congressional districts, ordered them redrawn by the end of this week, because the state Constitution has a free and fair clause. It says, all elections should be free and fair. Which is different than the U.S. Constitution. So these state constitutions really matter, and we want to see this redistricting process, this amended process, really have some stringent standards in our state constitution so that they have to play by those rules.
Okay, so you're looking to make amendments to the state constitution.
Yeah.
And does this involve a ballot question?
Yeah, so this would be a ballot question. This is what makes it difficult. The tough road to hoe I mentioned is that this has to go on the ballot because the General Assembly put it there. And nobody has a more vested interest in protecting the current system than the Assembly. So this will be a tough one.
Do you think, as we're going in with population changes and demographic changes, do you think that there is a need for substantial redistricting?
Well, so, the one headline people have heard is that we're probably going to lose one of our congressional districts. And, that matters, and that's important, and we've seen actually gerrymandering of our 2 congressional districts in the past. But those 113 state legislative districts also matter, and that's what we're focused on. So this would allow sort of try to depoliticize the drawing of those 113 maps.
And is it literally population based? So if it's someone lost and someone gained, said, hey, we got to move this line over a little bit to reflect that?
Yeah, so they always have to try to get population as equal as possible in computer technology. So good they can get it down to a single person. But they can use some of those population shifts to mask some political chicanery. And we want to respect that need to have equal population, but take away that political chicanery.
And how transparent or not transparent was it the last go around when you said specifically it was a District 35?
Yeah, so it was a show, but the real drawing of the lines happen behind the scenes. So Rhode Island outsources this to a consultant, and he's very good at following, the people who are paying his check, which is the General Assembly leadership. And so he would come out with the districts, but we knew that those districts were being drawn behind the scenes.
And how much give and pull is there when a map's produced, and is there feedback? Are there multiple iterations, or is it take the feedback and here's the final product?
Yeah, there are multiple iterations, and people did make a difference last time. There was sort of a hue and cry over some of the bad maps. The original District 35 was worse than the District 35 we ended up with. Hard to believe. And there were some over our congressional districts. There was some carping and some changes were made. But ultimately, it shouldn't have to take people sort of rising up. People should be in the process at the front end, not at the back end.
And explain a little bit what made the first one the worst and then the second one better. I mean, how was it obvious to say this was clearly against one particular candidate?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you take a district that was 1 or 2 communities and make it 3, 4, 5 communities so that a person has to try to represent the interests of multiple communities, not only do you make it difficult for that politician, but you're making it so that the people in that district might only not have as much in common with that community, 4 over. In fact, I think one of the first maps stretched the bay from East Greenwich all the way over to Tiverton, grabbing some Prudence Island and some Portsmouth. There's not a lot in common in Tiverton, with East Greenwich. We all know Rhode Island can be pretty parochial, so they don't drink the same kind of coffee milk on the East Bay and the West Bay, let alone share the same politics. It's
quite different across the Bay. So is this going to be a legislative battle to even get it through the Assembly to get on the ballot in November?
Yeah, no, this isn't going to be easy. We don't expect it to happen the first year we try it. But we think as the census happens in 2 years, as people's awareness of this issue rises, and you see it nationally kind of bubbling up in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and North Carolina. People are becoming aware. People are stopping me saying, somebody this morning grabbed me and wanted to talk about what was happening in Pennsylvania. And they realize how much this impacts our politics and that we need to change it.
And you say you're a little hesitant at the first bite at the apple, but once the census is done, talk with us about time frame. When is the redistricting done?
Yeah, so the new districts have to be in place by 2022.
Okay.
And so this reform could go on the ballot as late as 2020 to take effect. So we have 3 years to play with, not that we want to delay. But the process will really kick in early 2021. So we're talking a long time frame here, but a lot of these big reforms, separation of powers, restoring the jurisdiction of the State Ethics Commission over the Assembly, have taken 7, 10 years. So you have to have that time horizon, and we're lucky we can have that time horizon.
Do you think people, again, if they're listening to you here today and say, oh, this maybe makes sense, and maybe I should ask my legislator what they think of it, is this something you should be very cognizant of how your legislator responds, especially if they say they're opposed to it?
Yeah, and we'd like to hear from people about how their legislator responds. I know the speaker was asked about it, and he said, well, the representatives know their districts best, so they should be involved in the drawing the district. So we'd like to hear how legislators are responding. And this is so new, we don't even have a bill number yet. In the coming weeks, we'll have bill numbers, and we'll be advertising more for support.
And have you had conversations with any legislators that you can share with us?
I've talked to a number, and people seem interested in the topic. Like I said, it seems to be raising its national profile. And one of the things people don't think about is that even though we're dominated by one party, it doesn't mean there aren't squabbles within that party. And oftentimes redistricting is used to sort of settle scores within the party. So I went back and looked in the 80s. Richard Leach, who's now a Superior Court judge, was punished by the Speaker of the House because he was sort of a dissident Democrat. In the 90s, the same thing happened. In the 2000s, the same thing happened. So it just keeps repeating itself, which is why we need to change it.
And I'm assuming this is going to be a conversation topic this evening
Sure
at the Wild Colonial if you go to show up to hear Common Cause kick off their legislative agenda. So we've gone through a couple here. Let's keep going down the list.
Yeah, so the last big ticket item people might be familiar with is reforming how magistrates are selected in the state. So this is another long-running one. We've been working on this for almost 15 years. But all the judges in the state are picked by this one process. It's a fairly open process. You can go and testify pro or con one of the candidates. And the vote to send a list of candidates to the governor for a vacancy is a public vote. There's this second group of people called magistrates who are really like judges. They wear robes, they have a gavel, they sit on a bench, they get paid very similar, they have similar pensions, but they're selected by a different process, more opaque process, seemingly much more political process. And many of them are drawn from the ranks of former legislators or their family or staff, and that's not fair to the average person who wants to sit on the bench. So we want to put that process, that magistrate process, into the same process for judges. And again, this is something the Assembly would have to pass, but it wouldn't take a constitutional amendment.
And conversations up there about this?
Yeah, so this is something, like I said, we've been working on for almost 15 years. It did pass the Senate over 10 years ago. And so, we have some hope that by raising its profile again, maybe we'll get some traction. Not popular necessarily. Reformers like it, but the powers that be don't necessarily like it because they control the current process.
They like to be able to have a say in this as well.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I want to talk with you while you were in the studio, John, is this decision by the House and Senate leadership for the study committee on the line item veto.
Mm-hmm.
We had the speaker in just I think just after it happened, and his sort of rationale was, well, if 44 states have it, there's 44 different versions of line item veto, and if we want to have it here, we really need to discuss what it is that we're looking to have. What's your sense on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a bad thing necessarily to study things. The problem is there comes a time to end the study and act. And if we have a study commission and it comes up with some conclusions in the next couple of months, that's fine. But if it drags on to the end of the session and they use it as an excuse not to act on this, then that's not fine. Because the study commission passed last year, it could have been going for the last 6 months, but it wasn't. And this issue has been around. I found something from over a decade ago recently where this issue was raised. So there has been time to examine it. The governor has put in a really solid proposal, I think a really well-written and legally researched proposal, and it should be given consideration.
And you've talked about your big top 3 ticket items for the session, but what else are you going to be keeping an eye up there on?
So, there's always things that pop up that are unexpected. One thing that there seems to be a little interest in is around sort of open meetings because of all the shenanigans in East Greenwich we've seen. So we'll see if anything gets introduced on that. And like I said, things will pop up that you didn't even know were going to pop up. And we'll just be watching the process as a whole. Things really broke down last year in a big fight between the House and the Senate. And they both vowed not to really have that happen again, but the proof will be in the pudding.
And so talk with us a little bit. Let's go to East Greenwich. How can the Assembly legislate on something, what would the legislation needed to be done as what we've been seeing and you've been concerned about with East Greenwich as an example? Yeah,
so one example, is that East Greenwich kind of got slapped around the town council there for doing a lot in executive session. And this is when they do things, they go, behind closed doors for a variety of reasons. And we actually have a proposal that would require them, if they're going to do that, to tape them.
Okay.
And that's proven valuable in other places that have taped them, because if there's a dispute and you make a complaint, the judge can listen to that tape and see what really happened. There are that we also in that same bill would require videotaping of the open session and live streaming. We see the value of live streaming right now. More and more people want to consume information about government online. The General Assembly went to live streaming, I think in 2013. It's been incredibly valuable and popular. And local government is really important to people's lives, like in East Greenwich, as we see hundreds of people showing up for those town council meetings. They literally sometimes don't even have rooms big enough to hold everybody. They should be able to live stream it. It's fairly inexpensive to do.
I got to cover East Greenwich, and you had to get the special, get the Wi-Fi code to get in. It was just a small little barrier to get in. But talking, about the cities and towns around the state and trying to get everyone to have that sort of video live stream access, Well, you know, how would you grade Rhode Island for that open meeting transparency at this juncture?
You know, it's interesting. About a third of cities and towns do it. There's no mandate to do it yet. So a number of cities and towns are doing a great job on that already, without the sort of stick of the state coming in and saying they should do it. But I think to get everybody to do it, it's ultimately going to have the state coming in. You know, one of the interesting things we get pushback is they say, oh, well, that's an unfunded mandate. Back in the 70s, when they wrote the unfunded mandate law, they actually excluded a couple of things. And the very first one in that law says any costs related to open meetings, right? Because they value so much the importance of open government that it's even exempted from that important law.
Very interesting. Now, tell folks again the nuts and bolts tonight, 6:30?
Yeah, 6 o'clock,
Oh, 6
6 to 8.
Don't be late.
Yeah, at the Wild Colonial on South Main Street in Providence. So you can just drop in anytime between 6 and 8. And we'll have a little speaking program about 6:30. And then we'll answer your questions for the rest of the time.
So will you still have an end of the year wrap up?
We will. So we don't have a date on the calendar, but sometime in July. And this is actually a year we'll come out with our scorecard. Every election year we come out with the scorecard and rank the legislators on how they voted.
Well, we here in the media, we like scorecards, we like rankings, we like ways to cut the apple. So John, Marion, I appreciate your taking the time to come in here today and give folks an update on Common Cause's 2018 legislative agenda. I'm sure we'll talk with you soon,
Absolutely.
But in the meantime, I'll let you off to the Wild Colonial.
Okay, thanks so much.
John Marion, thanks so much. Okay, let you go around the corner.
Okay, thanks.
I want to thank John Marion for coming in today to give a preview as Common Cause of Rhode Island is doing their first official kickoff party for the legislative session at the Wild Colonial this evening, going through the legislative agenda, what they're keeping an eye on this session, and of course, as he mentions, we'll be catching up at the end with a scorecard as it is, of course, election year. Plenty of news and politics on GoLocalProv.com and more to come this evening. Now, if you go online, GoLocal was there this morning at the ACLU press conference. They sued for the release of Lilian Calderon, the Guatemalan national who was detained when she was going in to get her marriage, go through the process of starting the citizenship process, and a judge in Massachusetts just thereafter has decreed that she cannot be removed from where she is detained, and that means not detained further. So going to continue to follow this on GoLocalProv.com. And of course, one of the interesting stories today was the tsunami alert that the National Weather Service had popped up. We have that on there as well. And how that happened, not very often you get an alert on your phone saying a tsunami for New England and the East Coast, but it was in error. So we're going to take a break here. We're going to be back more tomorrow with The Taste with Rick Simone at 3 o'clock. Be back on at 4 o'clock with news and politics, but again, with all going on in the city this evening, stay tuned to GoLocalProv.com for more. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel.